Mr. President, this is Richard Peter here in Dallas, Texas, the founding member of the new Glorious National Party and its national political director. Today's date is Wednesday, February the 25th in the year of our Lord Jesus Christ, 2009. And I'm giving you this report and the members of my new political party this report on your speech last night. But before I give you my report, just if you haven't already, look at what the markets have done. They're down to 7,100. They lost the gains that were made last night, Mr. President. They lost the gains that were made yesterday because you didn't give the American people the specifics that they need. Now, I have given you a specific proposal, Mr. President, but before I go on and review it with you, because obviously nobody in your administration is listening, I would like to give an honest review of what you said last night to the American people. First, we're creating a new lending fund. You don't tell us what this lending fund is all about. Are you going outside the banks and loaning us the money directly? What's the interest rate going to be? How do we go about applying for these loans? Or are you just going to give these banks that have ruined the American economy the money to loan our tax money to loan us again out at interest? You see how stupid this is, Mr. President? The largest effort ever to help provide auto loans, college loans, and small business loans. Who's going to administer these loans? Are you going to inject capital into these banks like Chase and Wells Fargo that have ruined the American economy, Mr. President, made these bad housing loans? Or are you going to come direct to the American people with these loans and bypass? You see how ridiculous this is, Mr. President? It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. I don't want to spend any more time with it. Secondly, you go ahead and rehash this stupid economic plan, this stupid housing plan that you've got that was written by the mortgage bankers, Mr. President. Here's what you say. You're going to get lower, the American people are going to get lower interest rates, and the average family who refinances today can save $2,000 a year on their mortgage. Mr. President, that ignores the elephant in the room. The mortgage balances need to be written down. Your banking friends are not, Tim Geithner's not allowing you to write down the balances on the principal balance, is he, Mr. President? You know why? Because he's a greedy agent of the international banking cartel, and you've appointed him as Treasury Secretary against the will of many members of Congress when we were interviewing him. You put him in place. That's putting the fox in charge of the hen house. Yeah, so what? You save nearly $2,000 a year on your mortgage, but your principal balance is still overinflated. You need to write down these principal balances to reflect what these houses are actually worth. Don't you have the guts to do that, Mr. President? Don't you have the guts to stand up to your Treasury Secretary and tell him to go to hell and come back with something that will actually help the taxpayer, Mr. President? This is absolutely stupid. And then here is the most ridiculous thing that you've done of all. And third, we will act with the full force of the federal government to ensure that the major banks that Americans depend on have enough confidence and money to lend. So you're going to go back to the stupid banks, Wells Fargo and Chase. You're going to give them more of our tax dollars to lend out to us at interest in fake monopoly money that you print up at the Federal Reserve, and then you're going to give them this money to loan out to us, just trillions of dollars, perhaps. I'm just guessing here. I proposed a plan where we don't have to print up any more fake money. I proposed a plan yesterday before you even gave your damn speech that would work. You need to get back to me on it, Mr. President. We will act with the full force of the federal government to ensure that the major banks have enough confidence and money to lend. What about the accountability of these banks, this Chase Bank president, this Wells Fargo president? Why the hell don't you call on firing them? And why are you going to give them more money to loan out to us at interest? Fake money, monopoly money, Mr. President. We want a new currency that's honest money backed by gold and silver, Mr. President. And listen to this. This is the most ridiculous statement that you possibly could have ever made. I'm surprised that a man as bright as you would repeat this. Was it written by one of the hacks that worked for the banking cartel? Was it written by that greedy, selfish Federal Reserve, former Federal Reserve Chairman in New York that's now ruining your presidency by giving you the worst possible advice he could give? He works for the damn banks. The Federal Reserve. He hasn't changed his colors, Mr. President. Wake up before it's too late. You're going to ruin your presidency, sir. And when we learn that a major bank has serious problems, what the hell are you saying there, Mr. President? Don't you realize these banks have serious problems by now? And when we learn that a major bank has serious problems, we will hold accountable those responsible. What do you mean by that? Are you going to fire them? Are you? We're going to force the necessary adjustments. What adjustments, Mr. President? Be specific. Provide the support to clean up their balance sheets, print up more funny money and give them another $2 trillion, Mr. President, when I have a plan before you right now that will solve the problem without having to print more funny money, Mr. President? And assure the continuity of a strong, viable institution that can serve our people and our economy. Bullshit, hogwash, vague platitudes. The suggestion that you're going to print up more funny money and and put this country further into debt, Mr. President, by rewarding these people with another injection of a couple of $1 trillion that we're going to print up out of thin air. Now, I've proposed a plan that will not ignite inflation. Prior to you giving your address, you know what the market thought of your address? Down 170 points, Mr. President. Get a clue, Mr. Obama. This is the most ridiculous thing you could ever do to the American people, is get up at a time of national emergency and say, well, we're going to do something. We're not quite sure yet, but we're going to inject capital into the banks, inject more funny money that you're going to print out of nowhere to give to these damn banks that have ruined the American economy. You need to have your head examined, Mr. President. Now, I'm going to propose something that will work. No, I don't want you to nationalize the damn banks, Mr. President. You're going to what your agent of the Federal Reserve, also known as the U.S. Treasury Secretary, is going to do. He plans to print up trillions of dollars in thin air, inject it into these banks, that have ruined the big banks, Wells Fargo, Chase, and the others. He's going to print up trillions of dollars that are going to put our children and grandchildren into economic slavery because you as the president don't have the guts to raise our taxes to pay it. You're going to put it on the backs of our children and grandchildren by borrowing more money, Mr. President, okay? You're going to buy these toxic assets at the direction of Tim Geithner with with the price that the American people will pay the price on their backs with inflation. And you're going to allow these banks, from what I can tell, to set the price for these toxic assets. So they ruined the economy, they made bad loans, and now they want the American taxpayer to come and pay them full price for these assets that aren't worth crap. Now, here's what we need to do, Mr. President, to solve the problem without printing up any more funny money. You need to call me, Mr. President. Pick up the phone, 1-877-365-0042. Here's what we need to do, Mr. President. You'll notice it's specific, and it doesn't involve the taxpayer having to go into inflation, because you're going to be printing up some more funny money, counterfeit money at the Federal Reserve. There are basically 4 banks today that are in the crapper, Mr. President. You don't need to have an investigation to know which banks are in the crapper. Bank of America, Citigroup, JPMorgan Chase, and Wells Fargo, and there are probably a few others as well. What you need to do, Mr. President, listen, pick up the phone and call me, Mr. President. You need to create separate bad banks for each of these 4 institutions and maybe a few others, and finance them by having the government assume an amount of each good bank's corporate debt equal to the value of the troubled assets put into the bad banks. Then each CEO will be given one chance, Mr. President, and one chance only to sell any assets to a new bad bank owned entirely by the government. Assets will be conveyed at year-end at audited book values, not at some inflated price. Okay? Right now, those assets are illiquid and depressed, but the government can hold on to these assets until they regain transparency, until they regain value with complete transparency. Government pays for these debts by not printing new cash, but by taking an equal dollar amount of each bank's liabilities. Now, that's the plan, Mr. President. I'm going to put it in print here for you to read, if your people can read. You can tell I'm upset because the plan you proposed is a non-plan. Vague platitudes, Mr. President. Shame on you!